All right.
I can't actually hear you.
Okay, well, I think we are. Oh, nope, we're not quite there. Hold on, we are not quite there. We've got participants filing in, Jamie, which is good.
Nice.
But I just need to get us launched in one more thing here.
Take your time.
And that is, welcome everybody. By the way, welcome to all of you people who are here on time and even early. And we are going to go live here. And there we go. Now we're in the right spot. Okay, so it is my great pleasure to be here today with Jamie Dekes, fondly known as Dekes, the lawn care expert at Hyannis Country Garden. So, you know, the weather is so gorgeous right now, Jamie. Do you think everybody thinks that spring is here for good?
The people that are here definitely think spring is here already. Yeah.
We've move a little closer to the computer because I'm having a little bit of audio. Yeah.
How's that? Better?
So, better? And speak up a little bit so that we can hear you.
All right.
If somebody, you know what, somebody type in chat. Jamie, explain to people how long you've worked here, and somebody tell me in chat if they can hear them okay.
I've worked here since 2004. I started in the garden department a long time ago under Craig Nelson, who taught me everything I know. He was the guru, and they've kept me around this long, which is nice. So I'm happy for that.
Very good, very good.
Am I being heard?
Everybody says they can hear you just fine.
Perfect.
So
Perfect.
Thank you, everybody who responded in chat. Now, if you haven't joined us before, those people who are here with us on Zoom, you can type a question in chat. And if you are watching either the recording or if you are watching this somewhere else, know that you can bring your questions into the store and speak with Jamie in person. So save those questions up. And those people who are with us here on this presentation, by all means, type your questions in chat and we'll take a couple of breaks in order to get those questions answered. So that said, Jamie, I'm gonna hand it over to you. I'm gonna turn off my camera, but I am here. I will be monitoring questions and take it away, Dekes.
Thank you, CL. Thank you guys for joining me today, and happy spring. So I'm doing my lawn talk here, and this is going to be the first year on a PowerPoint, so be gentle with me. But I mean, this is going to be a basic talk. And my thing isn't moving, CL. Don't leave. All right, maybe I can do it that way. Okay. So, I mean, the basic thing here is everybody's looking to grow a lawn for the most part on Cape Cod. And, you know, this is just a good example. Oh, all right, so this is moving already. I got to get used to this. All right, so this is a basic example of what everybody wants. They got a nice lawn. They've got some beautiful plants around their house. Everything's looking good. It's not, you know, it's not your typical thing. A lot of people are struggling, you know, so that's a whole different thing. CL, this is killing me. I'm dying here with this already. Okay, so basically, this is what people are looking for. They want some grass. They want something nice that they can roll around on. You know, something that hopefully they're not hammering it with a bunch of chemicals or synthetics rather. And, you know, they don't really want to do a lot of work most times. They just want to enjoy a lawn. It's attainable. It's doable. It's not the easiest thing on Cape Cod. We don't really have soil structure that's good for growing grass. It's very compressed. We have sand and clay and a bunch of rocks. So that's a pretty tight soil structure. One thing that lawns need that we don't typically recognize is air. So all of these plants are finding the holes in the soil to grow their roots through. They're growing their roots through the air pockets. They're not necessarily pushing the soil apart to grow their roots down into it. So the fluffier your soil gets, the easier it is for you to grow a lawn. Most people start with something like this. You know, this is pretty typical for a Cape Cod lawn. This lawn in particular is pretty tight soil. It had some disease issues. It was basically struggling. So the way that you kind of want to think about this is you want to be as proactive as you can. there's a lot of reactive strategies for lawn care, whether it's moss killer or pre-emergent, or you're trying to deal with what you perceive to be the problem, as easy in a way as you can. Unfortunately, the things that we're trying to deal with aren't the problems. They're just a symptom. Like your grubs are a symptom of an issue. Your crabgrass is a symptom of an issue. Your moss is a symptom of an issue. So it's more about being, starting to work towards remedying those issues as opposed to just covering it with something. You can put a moss killer down and kill your moss all you want, but if the soil structure doesn't ever change, that's going to be the plant that wants to grow there. So what you essentially want to do is start thinking along the lines of compost and, beneficial things that we can do to make the soil structure better. If we know our soil is very, very tight, then we want to start, making it fluffier. That pitchfork in that picture too is not my pitchfork. I'm going to say that. It's it's not doing what any pitchfork should be doing. That's not the curve on a pitchfork, but that is a broken pitchfork. So if your pitchfork looks like that, probably don't use it. That was my buddy's, and that made it fun. But so the way that we kind of attack these things at the garden center here is we're going to give you, advice on ways of making things better. It's not always the easiest thing. Putting organic matter or compost on a lawn isn't going to be the most pleasant experience of your life. Just for math purposes, 4.5 yards of compost will cover a lawn at 1.5 inches for 1,000 feet. So that's a fairly decent pile. This lawn, I feel like it was in the 30 yards of compost that we put on this front lawn. And what you get after you start doing, what the plants need and start, amending that soil structure is plants that are gonna do a little bit better there. There's no silver bullet. There's no one thing that you can do that'll make your lawn gorgeous forever. But if we get you on track with better cultural practices, with better attack strategies, like I keep going back to proactive stuff, then you're going to have better results. It's going to start working. This is that lawn about 1.5 months, probably after I did it last fall. So, we basically just spread all the material. We've got some good products that we use, and I'll kind of go into that in a little bit. Not everybody's looking for grass like this. Some people kind of want that, that Cape Cod-y kind of lawn. Some people definitely just want to look at grass. And so this is kind of an ideal situation. If you do it right and, you get lucky, you get grass coming in really thick and really healthy and really happy. People want a little bit of diversity. So they kind of lean towards clover. Clover is something we sell a lot of down here. Clover, it comes in a couple different kinds. It comes in your micro clover or your mini clover, and it comes in regular white clover. This lawn that wanted some clover in there, it was a hot mess. It was basically just crabgrass. So the attack strategy here is I burned it with a torch. I burned the whole front lawn with a torch, and then I put that 1.5 inches like I did on that other lawn on this one. So I basically weakened everything with the torch, but the crabgrass would have died regardless. So she wanted microclover in there, and that is microclover and grass after about a week. It took about 3 days for microclover to germinate for me in the fall. It was pretty hot, so that was really warm soil, so it was very, very quick. It ends up kind of looking like that hot mess right there. She loves it. It's frumpy. That's about 1.5 months after it was installed as well. So obviously that's a completely different look than that, so everybody's got a different, perspective and a different opinion of what's beautiful. So this in particular is going to be a little frumpier. It just looks a little, it's not as manicured looking, but it's a very tough lawn. Like that's a lawn that's going to be able to take some abuse. With a proper watering structure this year to kind of get it going, it's going to thrive and do well. Clover spreads. So mini clover will grass can have issues in certain spots over another. If the soil's a little harder or whatever, it might not do as well. The clover will kind of fill in where the grass is struggling. Mini clover, micro clover is very nice because it's not super aggressive. It's not going to totally push your lawn out. It's going to work with the lawn. So Where the lawn struggles, the clover kind of takes over. Where the lawn's doing well, it's going to be the dominant force. White clover is another variety of clover that we sell. It's cheaper than the micro clover, but white clover can be very aggressive. So if you like more clover than lawn, or you don't really care about grass at all, white clover might be a good alternative. It's pretty intense. It'll definitely spread pretty fast in a year. It'll take some stuff over. So it's a really tough little plant, really easy. Same kind of deal though. You want to have a fluffy soil for it. You want to get the roots to go down. You know, a lot of people's irrigation systems are set up consistently. You don't really want a structure for irrigation. You do initially off the bat when you're starting a lawn, when you're germinating seed and what have you. You've got to keep it wet. It's got to stay wet the entire time. But after that, the whole point is to start watering longer and longer with less and less frequency. It's really the cultural practices that make or break people a lot of times with lawns. Everybody tells you something different. So it's hard to find consistency with the information out there. I learned from NOFA, Northeast Organic Farmers Association. They taught me how to do this kind of stuff. They had people there that had been doing this for a very long time. And so you learn from people that have been doing it, and you try and bring the practices forward and keep it going. I've had really good luck with organic lawns. Synthetic lawns, it's a little bit easier in the sense that you can just kind of walk away from it, but you're always going to have the problems. Like nothing ever really gets better in a synthetic structure. For us to grow lawns here, ultimately we're looking for this earthworm castings, right? So earthworm castings are an indicator that an earthworm is calling that spot his house. The cool thing about earthworm castings is that's a vertical tunnel. So when you find that little pile of poops on your lawn, you know that tunnel goes a foot or two straight down. Now, considering we're all growing cool weather plants here that grow their roots through the air in the soil, and we don't have a lot of air in our soil, our best friend to grow a lawn here is earthworms. So the more dense we can get them to colonize the soil, the easier it's going to be for us to grow the lawn. Whether it be get the water structure off of a water structure, because the whole point of that irrigation is to get you off of irrigation. It's not to keep you on irrigation, to help you survive that summer, where, ultimately the deeper the roots go, the more you're going to be able to, keep it green successfully through those hot and humid months, because the grasses we grow here really don't like the heat and the humidity. They just kind of want to go to sleep. So that's why everybody's lawn wants to turn brown in the summertime. So the deeper we can get those roots to grow, the greener that lawn's going to be with less input. That water structure should be getting towards once a week, every other week. That's our goal. We don't want to be watering every couple days, every 3 days. What tends to happen too is people start by watering, reasonably. And then as it gets warmer, we just start frequencying up. We just add more and more and more on because we think it's getting hotter. So it's drying out more, and it is. But ultimately, if our roots are here and we put water here, roots will come up for the water. So if we did a really good job at pushing a deep root structure, and then we go and turn the water on every other day, the roots are going to slowly start coming up for that, and it's going to make it weaker. And also certain things happen to like summer and wet, and we don't really want to encourage those. There's some bugs that we get. There's some diseases that we get that are pretty gnarly. And they're just getting happier as it gets hotter and more humid. So we want to kind of reduce a lot of the input that we're giving to this plant just because we don't want to encourage the problems. There's a few products that we rely pretty heavily on here. This is one of them. When I talk about bringing earthworms in and getting them to live there in your soil, this is one of the main things that we use to do that. Bioremedy is beneficial microorganisms, bacteria, and fungi. They eat what a plant exudes as a waste. So photosynthesis, chlorophyll production up top, carbohydrates and sugars are coming out of the bottom. So these little guys, they eat that as a food. So they use that. So they're going to live around that food source that your plant is giving them, right? And that soil around the roots, and they're going to break down soil and make it into forms that the plant can have access to. They're also going to be living in the same kind of spots that a pathogen would want to come into the root zone. So having that little bit of a blockade there isn't a bad thing at all. And ultimately, the thing that's really cool with these little guys is worms eat them. So when worms come into your soil to eat these guys, I always equate it to Jaws. You know, Jaws comes in, that was a classic movie when I was a kid. He'd come into the beach and he'd eat the people, right? So the worms to me are kind of like that. They'll come in and they'll go in after these microorganisms and they're going to eat them. But instead of killing them or destroying them, they poop out way more people or way more beneficial biology than they ate. So they're increasing the biomass of the soil. They're not decreasing. So having them come into that soil structure is actually going to be the thing that ramps up those little guys even more. So that's less stuff that you put down essentially, because I'm using these guys as a way to, you know, draw these worms in heavily. I'm going to use my earthworm casting piles as a visual indicator of soil health. The more earthworm casting piles I have, the more, you know, tightly packed those are, the healthier that soil is. And those are, you know, just exponentially increasing all that air going down into your soil. So the worms eat those guys. Those guys make soil food for plant. It's kind of a win-win, and they're super cheap. So that right there is 1 pound. It does 10,000 feet, and it's I think it's $35. So most of our fertilizers are in the $35 range for 5,000 feet. So it's a really good deal. That one lawn that I showed with the initial one that was just grass, 7 pounds of biology went on that lawn last fall. But that earthworm casting picture is from that lawn. Like that is, they're bringing them in. So they went a little heavy at them, you know, but that just brought them in faster. They have woods near their house too. So that's going to encourage them as well. There's going to be a lot of them there that you're just kind of, you know, that you're stealing them from. When you use that microorganism stuff, you need something to put it down with. And this is a hose end sprayer. And there's instructions on the tub, and essentially you plop a little chunk in there, you mix it with some water in the tub, you put the dial on the highest open setting, and you go nuts. You just spray it out. Those little guys are the guys that help break up water insoluble fertilizer. Okay, so all your organic stuff is water insoluble for the most part. It basically means it's not breaking down with the water, it's breaking down with other stuff. It's slower. Those little microorganisms help increase that availability. So the faster they break that stuff down, the more that stuff's available to the plant. So usually when someone's coming in for advice on, you know, going to use organic fertilizers or being more proactive and, you know, doing things with compost, I'm going to recommend spraying it down with the microorganisms, because I want to increase that biomass in that soil, whether it's to break down the compost or, you know, make that fertilizer that you've put down work a little bit better, or just keeping that plant healthy. I'm going to be using that stuff fairly consistently until, like I said, until you start to see earthworm castings all over the place every couple inches. You stay on this stuff until you get there. The more worms you can get, the easier your life's going to be. This is one of the fertilizers that we tend to sell a lot of for reseeding, North Country Organic. I also really like their seed. They make a really good dense shade grass seed. I tend to use dense shade grass seeds for the lawns that I do. Dense, I screw things up by nature. So if I'm picking a seed, I'm going to use something that I can't screw up that easily as far as light conditions are concerned. Like any dense shade grass seed I pick up, I can use in full sun. So I'm way more likely to use a dense shade, just because no matter where I put it, it's going to grow fine. You know, it doesn't really matter if it's a full sunny area or full shade, it's going to grow. So 100% viability in that seed. Whereas if I get a sun and shade, the seed that grows well in the sun isn't going to do well in the shade. The sunny seed won't do well in the shade, but the shade seed will always do okay in the sun. So that's a really good basic general thing. If you want a less grubbable seed, choose a dense shade seed, because it doesn't matter where you put it. This fertilizer is a slow release guy. Really good ingredients, as you can see on the bag there. I think that's a 2,500 square foot bag. Either one would be acceptable for starting a lawn. You're not supposed to use anything with phosphorus in it if you're just doing a general fertilizer, but that's your guy for if you're starting up. Perfect starter fertilizer for lawn, perfect for your roses, vegetables, annuals, trees and shrubs. I mean, great. It's just a good general purpose fertilizer. Limestone. So limestone on Cape Cod's pretty important for a lawn. Essentially, pH is where something eats at. So if our pH is low, you know, and our grass wants pH up here, it can't really get at much of its food. You know, it's not accessing much. So you use limestone to raise pH up so grass can have more access to what it wants. Right? Adversely, things like moss like pH down here. So if you raise pH up for what grass wants, moss isn't going to be eating as effectively. He's going to have a harder time to get his food. This is a calcitic lime. Calcitic lime, there's two different kinds of lime that we sell. There's calcitic and dolomite. The dolomite will come as powder and pellets. The calcitic is coming as pellets. Essentially, you don't need magnesium in your limestone. And when you use dolomite, if I remember correctly, it's like 12% magnesium, maybe 20 something calcium and 12% magnesium. Your lawn wants at least 8-to-1 calcium magnesium. So way more calcium, no magnesium. Magnesium is one of those elements that makes soil tighter. So it helps make it squishier, or more compressed, which you don't really want. Everything's about the opposite of that. You want to make it fluffier. So anything that's adding to that compaction, you want to bring out of your structure, you bring out of your system. You just want to put things in there that are going to make it better. So calcitic lime, it's just, dolomite lime, calcitic lime, they're both just limestone. It's just different kinds. So it's the same basic thing. You're just deriving it from two different limestones. Calcitic lime is going to have like 35% calcium to 2% magnesium. So a ton of calcium and no magnesium. Most every soil test I see from a lawn comes back high in magnesium because all the lime that they sold you for a long, long time was just dolomite. Like calcitic lime just kind of became popular in the time that I've been working here. So really not that long in the grand scheme of things. So if somebody was liming a lawn for 20, 30 years with dolomite, magnesium is going to be just absolutely through the roof. The grass doesn't use it at all. So it just sits there and it kind of adds and builds up. It makes soil sticky. It's not fun. Worms and things like gypsum are really the only things that we can have to kind of break through that. It's hard to break those soils up sometimes. So you don't want to add magnesium if you can help it. So this lime in particular, CalTurf Pro, I'm usually recommending this because it'll go so far. I'm getting older and I'm lazy. This will do the same distance that 5 bags of other lime or with a regular calcitic lime is going to do, or 10 bags. So if I can get away with putting 1 bag down on a lawn as opposed to 5 or 6, then I'm definitely going to go the 1 bag. It's just as good. It's pretty much what we sell the most of for the last few years. Once people found out that they didn't have to do as much work for their lime, kind of just caught on. But at 10,000 feet, it'll keep pH whatever it's at. At 5,000 feet, it's going to raise pH up a little bit. So that would be the lime that I would usually recommend to somebody, unless you've got a little postage stamp lawn, then you just use the regular calcitic lime. But either way, you would choose a calcitic lime over the dolomite lime. So your garden lime, the stuff that you see, like the Espoma garden lime, that kind of thing, that's a dolomite lime. So those things, magnesium's fine in your garden, but stick the dolomite in there and keep it away from the lawn. It's not really appreciating it. The pH has to be changed, and we might as well change it with the stuff that's easier to use. So this is North Country Organics grass seed, Catamount. This is whether it's their sunny version or their dense shade, it's in the same bag. They just have different labels. The dense shade is going to be a blue label. The sunny seed is going to be a white label. The shady ones, all fescues, chewing and red and tall fescue and that kind of stuff. But this is a really good company, and it's a little cheaper actually than the other ones. The Cape Cod blend that people tend to go with, it's a tall fescue blend. At 5 pounds, that's $35. That same 5 pounds for Catamount is $35, but the North Country, this one will do 1,000 feet from scratch, whereas the Cape Cod's only going to do 500 feet from scratch. So it goes twice as far. So it's a lot cheaper than the other grass seeds are, and it's really, really high quality. The only people that I would really, kind of tell not to use this kind of grass would be someone that's in a synthetic structure. And I concentrate more on organics than I do on synthetics. But it's just, as a lazy person that can mess things up, organics are a lot easier for me. I understand how it works. Synthetics are just, you're in the same cycle forever. So this kind of seed is a minimal input grass seed. So which means he doesn't really want a bunch of food. So I'm telling you, spring and fall for fertilizer at most. You don't need to concentrate on it. You wouldn't do a 4-step on it. You know, it's same deal as lime. You do lime in spring and fall, you do your fertilizer in spring and fall. But this is a great seed for people that really don't want to be putting heavy inputs out there. It's really, really green. This is actually what both of those lawns were, was that dense shade seed. And you can see in the pictures, it's doing perfectly fine in the full sun. But that's a really quality company, North Country, and I've had really good luck with them. Compost, okay. So compost is the fun part. Compost applications. Talk a lot about compost because I feel like we need to. You know, the soil tests that we get back are just abysmal. They do not have a lot of organic matter in them. A glacier scraped us really hard. So our fluffy went to like New York, Pennsylvania, wherever it ended up, and we got stuck with the sand and the clay. So compost is just like years of mulching grass and leaves all at once. And that's usually how we try and fix things kind of fast. You know, compost and the bio are a good 1-2 punch for speeding things up a little bit. Compost applications, it kind of depends on how bad things are. Usually this is a 1/2 inch right here. So you can see everything's kind of growing up around it. It's not really gonna smother anything. You're thinking of it more as a little top dress. Things are gonna grow right through that. You're just adding a little bit of organic matter in. You know, the compost applications that I did on those other yards, those we killed everything. We used 1.5 inches of material on top of plant matter we don't care about. So his lawn, the first one there that, I have to go way back for it, but essentially his stuff was just super tight, super compacted. So we didn't care. It was mostly weeds and it was mostly dead. So we covered everything. Crabgrass, if it's 60-70% crabgrass, same as moss, kill everything. Start from scratch. Doesn't matter. You don't have to remove anything. When you do that 1.5 inches of material, you put it right on the plants. I'll put 1.5 inches right on the moss. It'll be enough to smother the moss. And the way this stuff works, you're not going to see this on the soil for very long. Topsoil and loam are used traditionally, but those add to height. So they're just kind of sitting on the soil. Compost turns to a liquid. So it goes down through the soil. It doesn't stay on top very long. Usually within a month, 1.5 months, like those pictures you saw, you didn't see the compost on top. You just saw the grass. Because that compost, especially when you're adding in all those microorganisms, is breaking down. It's turning to liquid. Its end game result is turns to liquid, and that liquid pushes down through the soil and makes air as it goes through. Now, when that's happening, now you have air for your roots to grow through for your little seed. So your seed puts out its root at the same time that compost is breaking down through the soil. They help the compost helps the seed get its root structure into the ground and get going. When you do just a little bit, that's more for like if you're happy with your plants and you just kind of want to boost it up, you've gotten a soil test and it's low in organic matter, but things don't really look too bad. You can just do a little dusting. The math on that is 1.5 yards of compost will do 1/2 inch at 1,000 feet. And you don't really smother anything at 1/2 inch. You will when you screw up with the grading rake and you leave a pile on something. But no matter what, when you do a compost application, you're reseeding. You don't just leave it like that. You throw some seed into that. Compost retains water very well. So it's going to be a really easy thing to keep that seed wet for you. Topsoil will dry out a little faster. You still want to stay on it because you don't want that seed to dry out once you put it down. It has to stay wet for that germination process. And when you're dealing with like the Cape Cod blend, which is a tall fescue mix, or like even the fescue mix that I use, some of that stuff takes 3 weeks to germinate. So you have to keep that wet through that whole time. And compost is pretty effective at doing that. If I do 1/2 inch of compost too, if I'm just trying to make it look a little nicer, do half the seed underneath the compost and half on top. So then if you screw up, at least the stuff on the bottom will usually stay wet. So that'll always germinate usually. If you're doing more than 1/2 inch, you don't want to put seed underneath. You want to keep seed above because you're going to smother the seed, just like you would smother the plant matter that's down there. Some things will come up through it, but it's going to be a tough little weed. Most things are just going to get toasted when you put that 1.5 inches of material on it. So compost is one of our main sources of fluffing soil back up. So there's basically 3 real ways that we kind of we kind of, stick to. One is from above. So you've got your organic matter, things of that nature. You can put gypsum down. Gypsum breaks down and that makes soil fluffier. So you've got that kind of stuff. You've got the biomass in the middle of the soil. Those little guys are chewing things up, chewing up the soil. So they're making kind of aggregate out of things. They're breaking it down, right? And then you've got worms coming in from below. So it's kind of, you want to encourage that whole system in your lawn. You want to start mulching things. You want to get as much back down into the soil as far as organic matter as you can, because we don't have any in our soil to begin with. And that's one of the biggest reasons why we struggle here so bad. All the plants that we tend to grow, well, not all of them, but a good majority are compaction related. The soil is just too tight. If you see the same plant growing in your lawn that grows in your driveway, like that's a pretty easy assumption to make that things are just a little tight out there. And so alleviating that compaction is your biggest goal through all of this. And like, there's not, one thing that's going to make everything beautiful and perfect right away. Sometimes it takes some effort, it takes some work. A lot of situations have led to this for years. It's just been, whether it's constant synthetics out there or, nothing's been done and everything's been bagged, the landscaper bags everything. A lot of reason why things can tank on you. But being a little patient and having some good tools in your tool belt is going to help you overcome a lot of these problems. Patience is key. I'll talk to people that'll expect, night and day difference in a year or 3 years. I try and tell people, don't put a time limit on it. Everybody's different. You might be the lucky one and it takes a year for things to really turn around and it's gorgeous. It happens for some people, but it might also take you a few years to fix what's screwed up. Soil tests through UMass are something that we consistently recommend, because now if you get a soil test, now next year, you can look back at this soil test and you can see what you've done. How far have you come in a year with your mulching grass, mulching leaves, or your compost application, or whatever you may be doing, or even just sticking to what you've always done? Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? And when you get a soil test, especially when it has organic matter on there, that'll just give you clear, there it is. It's in writing. All right, you're getting better. It's getting a little easier. It might not look perfect, but you're on the right track. And that's kind of the mental process you want to take. You're probably not going to make a perfect lawn overnight. Not everybody's lawn comes out like that first picture I showed you, where a month and a half later, it's just gorgeous. People struggle. Water structures are hugely important. And that's always something, even me, I'm still learning about water structures. It's not the same for everybody. So you kind of got to go case by case basis. I had, if you are in a situation where, let's say, your lawn dries out for that noon to 2 time frame, you might have moisture in that compost underneath, keeping the compost wet, but at the surface, it's still drying out. So when that seed dries out, then you start losing seed. So even though you might push your finger in the soil and it feels wet, that surface is drying out. So you got to stay consistent with grass seed. You really have to stay on it 3-4 times a day. Keep it wet as you're germinating, and that'll help increase your odds of success too. Questions?
Okay, we've got some questions, Dekes. First of all, somebody asked, can they just mow over the bitter cress that is in their lawn right now?
This guy.
There it is.
This guy. Yeah, mow it over, bag it, get rid of the seeds. Get rid of the flowers. That is a fall and winter germinating guy. So in the fall, he's going to have a crop of seeds that germinate. And then in the spring, early spring, like January to February, he pops again. And that's where all these guys are coming from. But certainly just mow it down, remove the seeds. I really stress cultural practices. So the way that I would look towards remedying this in the future, mow that lawn at 4 inches, especially come fall, when these guys are germinating. The taller you mow your lawn, the shadier that soil structure is going to be. Tall grass is floppy. It's not spiky like that 2-inch grass that they like to cut at. That spiky grass, that's all the sunlight to the soil. You're going to germinate everything that wants to germinate with that kind of sunlight. So the taller you mow it, especially as it gets healthier and thicker and you work on your water structure this year, get things deeper, all your roots get deeper, it's going to be more invasive. Grass wants to choke things out. I actually took a picture of that lawn yesterday, and there is like a couple little bitter cress in there. There's a dandelion, but it's not everywhere. It's in a very few spots. like where that grass really wasn't able to, knit itself together, boop, he pops up. But some people will have it everywhere. So half the battle is just removing sunlight. The other half of the battle is water. So irrigation systems aren't really something that I've stressed or talked about too much, but your irrigation is kind of important off the bat. The whole point to that water structure is to get you off of a water structure, but nothing does that easier than the irrigation. So I don't know. So here's the deal, right? People talk about water structure, and I'm kind of breaking off topic for a second, but grass is one of those plants that's super easy to know when it's thirsty. And the reality is you want to water when your plant's thirsty, not because it's 2 days from when you last watered, right? So if we start paying attention to the plant, we let the plant tell us when it's thirsty. We water when the plant tells us it's thirsty. We can start improving our water structure. Now, how do we know when grass is thirsty? My grass that I use is very thin bladed stuff. So I take pinches of that. Wide bladed grasses like your tall fescue that's in the Cape Cod or Johnny Green, real easy to see. You don't really have to take a pinch unless your eyes are bad. That stuff kind of just glares out at you. What happens is grass blades are very much like a book, right? So like a book can be opened, book can close. It has a binding, right? So grass blades don't have a binding, they have a midrib, right? But they act very similar. So when a grass blade, think of this as like a little subsection, right? So grass blade is just a really long version of this right here. When a grass blade's flat, it's happy. It doesn't need your help yet. All right. So if you take that pinch of grass in the afternoon before you go in the house and they're all flat like an open book, don't water the next day. When grass gets thirsty, it closes just like this. All right. So if you take that pinch of grass and they all look like little L's or little canoes, tomorrow it's time to water. And what you want to think about with an irrigation system is whatever you watered before last year, now you water more, right? So let's say you ended up at a half an hour per zone last year when you stopped watering. This year, bump it up to maybe 45 minutes, as long as it doesn't puddle. Essentially what you want is if your roots were here last year with your water, you want to put water here. And that's hard to see with my face right in the way, but you want water where roots can get it, but you want the roots to go down for water, right? You don't want to put water here because roots will go up. You don't want to put water here because roots will have no reason to go down. You want to have water where the roots can get it, but below them. So as long as you've got air in that soil, that 45 minutes of water is going to go down farther than that half an hour previously did. And that's your goal, right? So what'll happen is, let's say you start every 3 days seeing your grass being thirsty. So you put that 45 minutes down, boom, 3 days, thirsty again, 45 minutes. What'll happen is that grass will go to 4 days before it gets thirsty. Right? As that little root drives down deeper in the soil, it'll take a little longer for him to need a drink. So when that happens, when he adjusts and he goes to that 4 days instead of 3, now you adjust and you water longer. Instead of 45 minutes to an hour. You're eventually going to come to an inability to progress. Wherever you run out of air, that's going to dictate how deep this can go. So that's kind of like the main difference between synthetic and organic, because synthetic is allowing you no air in that soil because it kills off all the things that make soil fluffy, or at least pushes them through the soil because they don't like the salt on their skin. Your soil just compresses, and a lot of people aerate that kind of soil. And for a synthetic structure, that's really your only show. But to me, as a cheap, lazy person, I hate recommending aeration to people. I'll use it if I've got to do, a compost application on a slope. But essentially, if your attack strategy is an aeration, you're taking plugs of soil out, you put it on top, and then what happens? Well, it rains and the irrigation goes off. And that soil that's on top now goes back in the hole. So you're left with exactly what you started with. The soil structure itself didn't change. You made it a little airy for a minute, but ultimately you're left with exactly what you started with. So aerations are kind of one of those things where I don't like telling people to do it, but if that's your only option, then go for it. You got to do something.
Jamie, that kind of leads into one of the questions that has come through in chat, which is how often should a person use bioremedy?
I go back to case by case. I use the worms as an indicator. I mean, it all kind of changes too, depending on what I'm doing. If I have a sick tree or a shrub, I'm going to use it on that thing once a week. If I've got a rose that doesn't flower, I'm going to use it on it once a week with some compost until I get that thing to just explode. On a lawn, probably once a month, every couple of weeks if you want. It depends on what you can financially spend on microorganisms, you know. The more the merrier. But I'm using earthworm colony. I'm using that casting pile as my indicator. If I've got an earthworm casting pile every couple inches, I don't really feel the need to continually hammer with the microorganisms because they've built up to where they're feeding enough worms that I've now got my problem kind of in check. Right? If I can build them up enough that those worms are everywhere, now everywhere is vertical tunnels. So I'm going to back off on them, and I'm just going to really concentrate on the spring and fall fertilizer and lime. I use the biology when I'm doing fertilizer and that kind of thing initially. So whenever I'm putting something down, I would always say spray it down with the little guys until you get to that point where you have earthworms saturating your soil. You kind of use it as frequently as you see fit. We use it to kind of suppress some diseases too. There's a couple guys in there that eat pathogens, which is a pretty good thing. So it doesn't hurt to spray other stuff with it, like all your perennial garden, your veggies, annuals, all that kind of stuff. As long as you're not using synthetics consistently, then they're fine. You're not damaged them. One shot of Miracle-Gro isn't Armageddon, but if we use Miracle-Gro every other week, not much is going to survive that soil structure. So kind of depends on what you do for fertilizers and that kind of action. But you know, as much as you can.
Okay. I just want to reassure those of you who have questions about things like moss and grubs, that's coming up in the next session. But before you go on to the next session, Dekes, we've got two questions about compost. First of all, what compost do you recommend? And secondly, if somebody puts down 1 inch to 1.5 inches of compost and is on the top, like we saw that picture, can you work it in with a rake?
You don't need to. I mean, I'll use a grading rake to put the compost out, and you know, grading rake at like 90 degrees is going to get you a pretty solid, smooth, you know, 1/2 inch. I'll go more this way if I'm trying to get a little more material out there. You just go back and forth. You kind of level it out. You don't really want to see bumps. A rock rake is harder to do a compost application with. The grading rakes have a flat back with some teeth on it, and it kind of just really helps. The teeth have little nubs on the front too, so it doesn't really dig in like a rock rake does. It's a little more gentle, but you don't really work it in. The whole point of that compost is it turns to liquid. So it does the working in for you. It's like in a garden, for example, if we were to do compost application on a garden, you don't till it in. You just leave it on top. It'll work in on its own. The less you can disrupt that soil structure, the more biomass you'll be building. Everybody lives at a certain spot. So if we just go and start like that, everybody gets displaced. Now you've got to do more to get back to where you were. So just the organic matter on the top is all you do. You just put it down and you rock and roll. Try and keep it smooth on the lawn. You're assuming you're going to kill stuff when you do 1.5 inches, so it doesn't really matter. You know, you're going to kill it anyway. So just go nuts with it. I'll usually tell somebody to roll it out afterwards. I did one lawn last year that was right before the 6 inches of rain, and then they had another 6 inches of rain like a week later. And that was like 25 yards of compost that I had put down like 2 or 3 days before. I think the only reason that didn't wash away was because I rolled it. I filled the roller by an accident. I left the water on in it and it was heavy as heck, but that locked that compost into the top of the soil more effectively than it just sitting there. If I have a really hard, tight soil and I put fluffy on top and it's just nice and fluffy, water can get under there and sheet that off. We had very little washout. We got very, very lucky. It's kind of the worst scenario you could imagine or hope for installing a lawn. But rolling that compost out really, really helped. If you use an aerator and you aerate it first and then put that compost out, compost kind of locks down into the holes. It's one of the few times I recommend aeration. If you've got any kind of slope or you're worried at all, aerate it and then do your compost. But no, you don't really work it into the soil. Don't work any harder than you have to. It's so much work to do a compost application as it is. So keep your work light. Keep your workload light.
Let's go on with the rest of our program, Jamie, because we got 15 minutes. So
Boom, problem solving. Okay, moss, compaction, we're done. No, it's so this guy likes tight soil. The tighter the soil, the more water it's going to retain. The more water it retains, the happier the moss is. So that's another reason why we throw compost on it, because that compost makes the soil fluffier. It's going to drain better. You're not going to have the water retention long-term that you have. It's going to help to bust it up. Same deal with worms. The more we can get them to colonize, the better the soil drains, the less moss you're going to have. Moss tends to grow in the shade because it likes to stay wet. So it's harder to keep the soil wet in the sun. It'll grow in full sun if you water wrong. You know, if you've got irrigation on all the time, it'll certainly grow in full sun if it's happy, but it tends to stick in the shade. And that's definitely a compaction plant. He definitely likes a low pH. So you want to use that calcitic lime to help, you know, remedy that. The higher, the more the pH is towards what grass wants, towards that neutral, the less effectively moss is going to be at eating. So he's going to struggle a little bit more, which will give your grass a little edge up on him. That's your compacted cruddy soil right there. Typical for Cape Cod. I mean, that's what a lot of places look like when you roll onto the scene. Bent grass. So bent grass is a problem that so many people come in with, and there's no real easy, well, so they have a product called Tenacity, which is a synthetic, and it's kind of gnarly. So be careful when you use it, wear your gloves and all that stuff. Try and take clothes off before you go in the house. You don't want to bring any herbicides into the house. They don't break down in the carpet or on the couch. But this kind of guy is either a manual removal or, you know, it's a scorched earth policy. If you try and do a manual removal with bunt grass, and that's really what's recommended, especially when it's small like this before it's taken over, because bent grass will just go nuts. You go 6-8 inches out from the edge of this stuff and you kind of cut down and then you go underneath it and you pop it out like a pizza. And that's how you attack that. Put a little topsoil down, throw some compost, and you go after it. But he's kind of a jerk. Yeah, your nutsedge. I don't know if you guys can see it, but in the middle over there, you got all those light green grass blades. Nutsedge is another guy that you can kill with a synthetic like Tenacity. Most times, if it's not too entrenched, I'm going to tell you, take a pitchfork, go underneath it. You know, I'll go next to it with a pitchfork. I'll go underneath it and pop the pitchfork up, and then I can kind of pull those guys out. Most times they're in the 2 to 3 inch range underneath the soil, 4 inches maybe. So you can go underneath, pop it. I can weed them out without really disrupting the lawn too much, and then you can just kind of let the lawn go back. But again, you can go into the synthetic route if you want. We don't really carry any of the hardcore stuff. We're one of the first people to kind of take it off the shelves if we know that it's really bad. But the internet, you can find anything. So Tenacity is what that stuff's called if you need a hardcore guy. High traffic areas, it's typical. You know, everything's tight, everything's struggling. Grass does a little bit better on the outsides where it's not getting, or in the middle where it's not getting, trampled so much. But pretty typical problems. That's what we deal with here. Same as the edges dying. It gets really hot. The heat isn't really the best for the grass. So it's always a struggle next to your driveway, but it's not happy grass. Compost that thing. This is a problem I don't have to deal with. Like I said, I screw everything up. I can't really do this to a lawn. It would take a lot of effort to screw up an organic lawn like this. You see all the streaks in it. That's basically, there's more fertilizer in some areas than others. So it gets nice and green in those, but not as much in the other areas. If you are a synthetic person, I'd recommend a broadcast spreader instead of a drop spreader. We had somebody call for one the other day, but there's not really much of a calling for drop spreaders anymore. Whip spreaders are a little easier. You just come away from the edges farther. You try not to throw all this stuff out into the plants. But broadcast spreaders will help alleviate some of these problems if you typically end up with stuff like this. Too much water. So yeah, that's fungus on your lawn. Not the best. You definitely want to work on that water structure. Come in and talk to me if you need some clarification on any of that stuff. The water is really one of the more important things that I would stress as far as cultural practices. You want to mow tall, you want to mulch everything, but if that water structure is out of whack, it's really, really hard to help. We have to gain traction there for other stuff to really improve. Nothing will really work if it's getting watered every other day kind of deal, or like this is 2 times a day. Yeah, we don't do that unless we're germinating grass seed. You're never watering more than once a day. You know, your goal is once a week, every other week. You work slow towards that, you know, but this would be way too much. Cutting too short. That's a problem when the plant you're growing breathes through its blade, you know. Like everybody loves those well manicured short lawns, but it doesn't, the grass isn't happy at all. It makes us happy, but it makes the grass sad. So the taller you can cut it, the better it's going to breathe, the more food it's going to make for itself, the shadier the soil is going to be. There's a lot of benefits to growing your lawn taller. So 4 inches is what we try and get people to do. For me, that's behind the tallest setting on my push mower. I just use that little bump as a way to set it up even higher. But as high as you can cut, that's typically the best way to cut. Mushrooms. So not a bad thing necessarily. An indicator, that's a flower of some wood breaking down. Wood breaking down is a good thing in my perspective, because now that's going to be a food source. In synthetic lawns, you'll tend to see these guys when you're watering too frequently because the soil's wet. It's going to pop these up. Organic lawns, you're going to get these guys coming in as soon as there's something to break down. You'll see it a lot when you start using bioremedy. If you've never done anything like that, all the sticks in your yard are going to start to break down and be a food source. Everything just gets munched up, and the fungus is the ones that do that. So it's just a flower for a guy chewing up some wood in the yard. If we're watering too much, it's a good indicator of that. But if you're using reasonable water structure, it's just stuff breaking down. It's perfectly natural, nothing to worry about. You can kick them over if you don't like the look of them, but they're not really a problem at all. Grubs are there because your water structure is wrong or it rains at the right time. Grubs are one of these jerks. And if you want to know what kind of grub you've got, you can look at his butt. His backside will have fur on it, and the hair pattern will tell you what kind of grub it is. Our Japanese beetles that we normally get bothering us have a little V pattern on their butt. But every style of grub has a different raster pattern. But our grubs are here because, first off, Japanese beetles lay eggs in wet soil over dry. So the more moisture you have in your soil in that June timeframe, middle of June kind of dealy, the more they're going to love laying their eggs there. And realistically, they're only doing damage in those yards too, because for them to do damage, your root mass has to concentrate where they eat. Those insects eat in the top 3 inches of soil. So if you colonize all your roots right there, it's like a plate of spaghetti, round, they just come and just destroy everything. Visual damage, bad. If you've got deep roots, think spaghetti hanging from fingers, much more difficult for them to get at all of that. It's not concentrated. It's not so easy for them to do damage. So even if the attack strategy is just getting the water structure better so your roots are deeper, that's going to help prevent grub damage. I don't really care that there's grubs in the soil, but if they're there in numbers that are going to do damage to your plant, then you start worrying. So you use good cultural practices. We get a better water structure by summer. We don't just ramp up the frequency of water because it's getting hotter. We water longer and longer, less and less often. We get those roots to go down. If the roots go down, you're going to be safe. If your roots colonize right here, you're going to be in trouble. At the very least, if you're not watering every day, they'll go to your neighbor that does. So that's, if you've got the one over there that's always watering, you want the grubs to go to that guy. You don't want them coming to you. So work your water structure to be better. There's a few ways that we attack these guys if you do have problems with them. Milky spore is one, nematodes is another. Nematodes is probably my favorite. It's a little bit more work to put it down correctly. A lot of times the few times that I've heard landscapers talk about nematodes, they're like, it doesn't work. Well, it won't work for a landscaper because they do stuff in the daytime. Nematodes have to be put down at night, preferably during a rainstorm, or at least rain, or soak the crud out of the soil before and soak the crud out of the soil after. They're little microscopic worms, so sunlight will nail them. Anything, even the microorganisms that we're using, the bioremedy, I don't put that out in the middle of the day. I'm not trying to get the sunlight to cook all these guys before they even get to hit the soil. So usually I'll use that stuff at the end of the day or in the morning or in a rainstorm. If the sun's not out, it's raining, it's perfect, go nuts. Nematodes, I would probably even wait till almost evening regardless, because UV, it's just one of those things. You want everything in that box to be viable. You follow directions to a T, but nematodes slide through orifices, release a little pathogen in there that kills them. They eat and reproduce and spread more. They're active hunters, so they'll go look for these little monsters. Bacillus papillae is what milky spore is, and that stuff is a little different. That you put down in a little grid pattern every 4 feet, if I remember correctly, a little dollop of it. And a grub goes through that, it eats enough of it, that stuff builds up inside, spreads more spore. So it needs grubs to move it, essentially. Nematodes don't need anything. As long as the soil's wet, they're going to move through that soil structure. And they're pretty nice. They'll live for a few years in the soil too. Synthetic guys, you're gonna nail them with your herbicides and stuff like that. So maybe stick to traditional grub killers. But you organic people, you've got a few options. And there's the goal right there. Happy puppy, happy lawn. If you are a synthetic person, just be careful with the kids and the pooches out there. It doesn't take very long for something to get into the skin, and the animals lick their fur and all that stuff. So try and keep them off of these things for an extended period of time. I don't, even if it says it's fine in a day, I would wait a few days, at least until you can't smell that smell anymore. Everybody knows that synthetic smell. So try and keep them off it until that smell goes away would be a good general rule of thumb. But the longer, the better for keeping them off that stuff. Any questions? How are we doing?
We have about 5 minutes left. Jamie, why don't you press stop share so that we can see you better? All right. And yeah, so what about chives or wild onions in the lawn is a question.
Same deal. You can spray them with stuff. You can pop them out too. To the best of my knowledge, they've got that little guy underneath, that little nut that they're growing out of. Some of those things are perennials. I'm pretty sure nutsedges are perennial. So, getting those nuts out is going to be better to me than repeat application of a killer on top. You've removed it. It's gone. Sometimes you get lucky and things cluster. So I would do my best to manually remove. The best attack strategy I've come across for things like that is a pitchfork. Just go out beside it, go underneath it, pop it up. As little disruption as possible, just pull all those little guys out. And that would be my attack strategy for it.
I did one year when we had a lawn infested with wild onions or chives. If they tend to pop up before the grass starts to actively grow. So knowing that if you mow low when they're first popping up, you can weaken them, and some of them don't come back. Some of them come back and then you can remove them manually.
That's perfect.
Might give that a shot. If your lawn, the person who asked if your lawn hasn't started to grow, you might try mowing low and weakening that plant a couple times.
Well, and I would add in too, like if it's at the very beginning of the season, even if your lawn is starting to grow, mow it short. You want to bag that stuff your first cut or two. You want to get rid of any molds and funguses that are on there from the winter. I would also say sterilize the lawnmower. It's one thing I'll leave you with. Nofa recommended Simple Green back 15 years ago to me. So that's what I've always told people to use. There's lots of things that'll kill stuff, but that's just safe. You're not killing a lawn when you're spraying Simple Green out there. When you spray the underside of your mower, your wheels, your weed whacker, you can do your shoes if you want to be nutty about it, because I've seen disease roll around in shoes. But take basic precautions to not spread stuff. And that first cut of the year, 2 cuts, definitely cut short, remove anything, grass blades and that kind of stuff, and then go tall. So
Jamie, we have time for this last question. Mulching lawnmower, yes or no?
Yeah, 100%. Like I said, the only real time to stress bagging is first cut of the year, especially. And if you get a disease or something, you might not want to just launch all that stuff around. You might bag it. Or like people that have the bitter crest right now, the hairy bitter crest. If you want to remove the flowers from it, cut it short and bag it. It's obviously best to mow tall, but there's times when you're going to cut short. It's not the end of the world. Just, keep it as tall as you can generally and rock and roll.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, Dekes, and come in and see this guy in the store with all your questions. All right.
I'm here all the time. So